Father, we thank you for your great love towards us. We thank you for Sabbath, and we pray now that as we've come together, that we will truly be in your rest. We pray that we may understand your message for this time, that we may have an experience in keeping with what you're telling us. Bless us now as we move further into our understanding of what philosophy threatens to accomplish. May we understand our part as Seventh-day Adventists, how we need to be studying, how we need to hear your voice. Bless us now as we deliberate upon these points in Jesus' precious name. Amen. Well, we've been talking about the pagan thought process, and we want to understand some of this versus the way Christians think. And of course, Christians think the way the Bible does. So when we're talking about these different thought forms, we're really trying to understand what the Bible is revealing to us. Now, one of the critical parts about this that we really have not really brought out yet is that what we're dealing with here is the mind. Okay? The mind. Now, there's a lot been written and discussed about the mind. People who deal with religious issues, especially Christianity, point out that the carnal mind is not able to understand any of the things of God. And I want to address that today. While that is a true statement in terms of spiritual things, and being able to do spiritual things, or to accomplish spiritual things that satisfy God on the plan of salvation, I think we're going to have to take another look at this to see what the mind is capable of understanding. Because we all have to start someplace. See? And if the carnal mind has absolutely no equipment at all to understand God, well, how are we ever going to understand anything? See? So that's what we want to look at. We just don't want to swallow things the theologians are telling us. We've got to use our heads. We've got to use our minds. Okay? So maybe one of the first things that we can think about here is Genesis. When God created man, He gave him a mind. What kind of a mind was it? Could he understand what God was telling him? Did God have in mind that that person know what he was saying? Yeah, man was created by God with a mind to understand. So that's basic. Now, when man thought certain thoughts, did he think them as a sinless being? Did he think them differently than God thought about them? There's no reason why he should have thought it any different, should he? If God said the sun's going to be there tomorrow morning, why should the man think it a different way? The way God thought about it was the way man would think about it. Okay? So man was designed to think like God using the same thought forms. Okay? Now, we want to get a hold of these very basic things in the beginning because the pagan thought form will even take scriptures and misuse them. For example, Isaiah 55. What is it? About verse 9, it says, my thoughts are not your thoughts, and my ways not your ways. And the pagan thought form will say, well, God thinks a whole different way than man thinks. Now, I say that's a pagan thought form because it's not what the Bible is saying. The Bible is not saying God thinks in a whole different way than you think. God said, my thoughts are not your thoughts. Why? Yeah, he's so much superior. It's not saying he's thinking a different way. He's talking about his capacities. Okay? So he's saying my thoughts, my way of dealing with it is different than your way of dealing with it because you only see so much. Okay? But the logic that I am using is the same logic I have given you. We use the same reasoning ability, the same reasoning methods. But my capacities are way beyond yours. So man has a reasoning capacity that's like God's. Didn't Isaiah also say that? He said, come, let us reason together. Well, if man didn't have a capacity to do that, how could God tell him, let's reason together? Now, we have not introduced the problem of sin yet. Okay? We're just talking about man as God made him. He was connected. He had a mind. He could understand. He could reason. And all of it was like God. Now, that's very important because theologians today are not saying that. Even Martin Luther said a few things that have been misunderstood. He says that by reason you cannot get to God. Well, that's true. Sinful man by his reasoning powers cannot get to God. But sinful man, with God revealing himself to that man, can use those reasoning powers to get to God. They're the same reasoning powers. We'll talk a little bit more about that. I want to make a contrast today based on just this little bit of information we have from Genesis, that man has a mind made by God to understand God. That's what we want to begin with, because modern science and theology and philosophy all say something different today. And we want to know why. And the reason we want to know why is because Seventh-day Adventism is in danger of believing what the modern philosophers are saying. And I can prove it. I can show you places in print where some of our scholars have already said the same thing that these philosophers are saying. Okay? So we want to pick this up because there is a true Adventism that's going through, and it may not be some of the things we're going to be hearing in the near future. All right, so let's take a look here. When I'm talking about Adventism and some of the shifts it's taking, it's not generally the people that are making those shifts. It's the higher educated ones, the ones who have gone to the modern universities to learn the philosophy of the great men. Okay? Now, this is an old trick. Alexander the Great was used by the devil to do something to the Hebrews so that when Jesus came, they wouldn't be ready. Alexander the Great had a dream. And in that dream, he was bowing. That had to be a dream. He was bowing in front of a man. And he saw this man standing on some steps with robes and everything. He thought, that's an interesting dream. But one day, he found himself in front of that man, for real. And he said, oh, I think I understand this dream a little better now. So he bowed. It was the high priest of the Hebrew nation. And Alexander the Great said, you know, I had the dream. That's why I did that. He said, there must be a reason why we're connected here, and I don't understand all of that, but I'll tell you what, you give me some of your best men, and I will give them a liberal education at the best place in the world, Alexandria, the finest library in the whole world, at my expense. You choose the men, we'll send them down there and they can study, and you will have the most informed people on earth working for you. See? And so the high priest thought, well, that's pretty good. So he sent them. They went down there and they studied. And they came back with some of the finest information this world has ever produced from men's minds, philosophers, the Greek way of thinking. And they brought this back, these men, and they began to teach it to the others. And it began spreading out, this wonderful scholarship. And when Jesus came, the Hebrews had been Hellenized. They'd been turned into beautiful Greek scholars, and they rejected Christ. The devil knows how well that works, to put pagan thought forms into God's people. But you have to get the leaders. You have to get the scholars. About 1937, we started sending our scholars to the universities to get doctor's degrees. And since 1937, that has been working its way through our educational systems until we're into the third, fourth, fifth generations of that now. Doctor's degrees. You don't have a faculty if you don't have doctors. Doctors of what? From the school Chicago Divinity? From the Montclair, California University? From the, it goes on and on. The list, the big name schools where our people are getting their degrees and have gotten them and have begun to teach those ideas they learned through the system. And Adventism has been imbibing in this since 1937. Now that was before I knew anything about this, but in 1955 and 54, I began to learn a little bit about this. 1960s, through there, I began to notice this. And even though I was a new Adventist, I knew there were two Adventisms. I could see there was one in these books and one that was developing historically. And I could see the difference, and I began to study it to see what was happening. Now, as I've told you before, this is God's church. There is no other that he calls his church. It's going all the way through the way he designed it, but we're not going through without a struggle. There's going to be a powerful struggle in our own midst. And that's what I'm trying to warn you about. To look for it, to see where it is and what you need to do about it in your own private life. If you are not studying for yourself, you're going to be taken in. If you believe everything that they say, no matter where it comes from, you're going to have a problem. You must weigh everything from the Bible and the spirit of prophecy, and you must do it on a spiritual level, not a scholarship level. Okay? They're two different worlds. And I will try to give you some clues today as to where the devil is trying to hurt us as a people. Because it's very clear historically. Our modern university-educated scholars, I have to say, I have friends in that category. And I have to say there are some really fine people in their midst. Gentle, kind, informed, and very, what's the word I'm looking for? Concerned about Adventism. But there are some things that have crept in that I think some of them are not aware about yet, and we want to look at some of those today. What are some of the things that have been happening that even some of our best men don't see clearly yet? Men who are concerned about Adventism staying true. We have things in our midst that you might recognize. There are a couple of publications. Spectrum, anybody recognize that name? I was at Andrews University when that started. The man who started it was right there. And we talked about what would be in that before it actually came out. He had just come from Harvard with his doctor's degree. Bright man. There's the Forum. That's another publication. Okay. Scholars. This is where the scholars deal with things. Well, let's move into our subject today. The things that scholars deal with are problems. Okay? They just don't study things just to be studying them. They want to make Adventism effective in this world. In 1955, they did it. Through 1957, President Figueroa, with some of the top men in this church, decided that we should be accepted by evangelicalism. After all, we're a true church just like them. See? And they should appreciate the fact that we are really Christians. And so we are going to show them we are Christians just like them. Well, the scene was all set, and one day Toby Unruh was listening to the radio, and he heard Donald Barnhouse preaching on the book of Romans. And I knew Toby Unruh. It's interesting to me, all the different places the Lord has seen fit to put me, so I know these things firsthand. I don't have to go into history books to find them. Okay? They're there too, if you want to look. But Toby was listening to this man on the radio, and he thought that's a very good talk on the book of Romans. So he wrote him a letter. Now, he was the president of a conference, Toby Unruh. And he wrote the letter, and the fellow got the letter, and he says, well, who is this telling me about my good sermon? He says, a Seventh-day Adventist. So he wrote a letter back to Toby Unruh, and he said, I don't want your letters telling me how good my talk was, because you don't know anything about the book of Romans. You're a bunch of legalists. So you keep your compliments to yourself. So Toby wrote back, and he says, well, maybe some of us are legalists, but but I think you've got a wrong slant on this. We believe in justification by faith the same as you do. And so Barnhouse didn't like this. And he had a young man who was going after his doctor's degree named Walter Martin. And he said, you go talk to this Toby Unruh and see what's going on here, because you're writing stuff on the cults. This is one of them. Go find out what he's talking about. And without going into the whole story, by 1957, the leadership of the Adventist Church had talked to Martin and invited him in and shown him books and all this. And Walter Martin found things that Adventists believe that he said are not in the Bible. And he went to the leadership and he says, you have books out there that say such and such. And the leadership said, no, we don't believe that. Okay? We don't believe that. He said, well, it's in your books. We'll take it out. Bible readings for the homes. They did change some things in there. Well, I'm not going to go into that whole story. That's not our subject today. I just want you to know a little bit of history here. In 1955 to 1957, we were making a major shift because we wanted to be accepted by the evangelical churches. Now, if you were baptized after 1957, you joined that new movement. You did not join the Adventist Church of Ellen White. Okay? Now, that doesn't mean that you did not have the Seventh-day Adventist Church of Ellen White available to you.
That's what the spirit of prophecy is all about. See? That's why we have those books, is to preserve true Adventism through all of this. And so a whole new group of Adventists were invented. And they like their jewelry, and they like their wine, and I'm not going to make you a list. And they thought it was okay. And I can prove that one too, because something happened when Desmond Ford stood up. The Adventists put on their ring and started drinking their wine because that was okay. All right, so the reason I'm telling you this is because behind it is a thought. There are certain problems in Seventh-day Adventism that we have to resolve so that the rest of Christianity can accept us. We are behind the time. That's what the scholars do. They delve into the problems to solve them. See? We don't do that, do we? We just live Christianity, but they want to define it. Now, what are the problems? Well, there are certain irreconcilable facts that the scholars have worked out. That is the Sunday-keeping scholars. And those are set in concrete, and they say that based on the historical, contextual, linguistic method of exegesis, Daniel 8:14 says this. And in the Great Controversy, it says the opposite. And so our scholars have gone to work studying the historical, linguistic, contextual method of exegesis, and they have become expert in it. And based on their study, using those techniques, there is a problem between what the Bible really says and what it says in Great Controversy. That's why we are going through this pagan thought form thing. Okay? Is to try to understand what is that historical linguistic. Yeah. Where did that come from? What methods does it use, really? Well, we're going to go into a little background here because we don't want to think of our scholars as being anything but honest people. Okay? They're trying to do the best they can, but there's something, I'm afraid, that's been overlooked up to this point. Something the Lord's going to have to straighten up with us as a people. There has to be a way out of the problem of what the Bible says according to that critical study method and what Ellen White says. Well, there's an answer. They've come up with an answer. A pagan answer. The woman sits on a beast. The woman's the church. The beast is the devil. Okay. Pagan thought forms. The woman relies on pagan thought forms. The devil is trying to get us over to where the Catholic Church is. Relying on thought forms that are not in the Bible. We have a whole new generation of Adventist scholars. I went to school with some of them. Okay? I know what this is. I saw the shifts as they were happening day by day. Back in the late 60s, the early 70s, and in 1980, one of the most respected scholars in our denomination stood up, and I'll tell you some of the things he said, and they're in print. A man who has contributed a great amount of things to this church. But there's something else going on here. Our scholars, the ones who are serious, never argue against Ellen White. You will not see that in print. What they say is this: she was not a theologian. Yeah, not a theologian, and that's supposed to take care of the problem. See, we respect her. We know her writings are from God, but she was not a theologian. Well, not a theologian. Desmond Ford stood up and said it in front of me, in front of 700 other Adventists. We were in a debate on that day. He said she is pastoral, not authoritative. See? This is the way scholars talk. This is their way of saying, hey, she didn't know what she was talking about. When it comes to Daniel 8:14, she just didn't have the education to cut it. She did not use the contextual, linguistic. She didn't know the languages. Historical. She was not a historian. She used the proof text method. So modern scholarship has led to conclusions that are the opposite of what Ellen White said. When Desmond Ford stood up in the 70s, he was not alone. And he knew he wasn't alone. It surprised him that the church attacked him, because he knew any number of scholars that agreed with what he was saying. When we had that debate, I don't like debates, but I have never moved away from one when they attacked the church. It's the only time he has ever been in a debate in front of people. It was in Fresno. And to be sure I was properly informed before the debate, he sent me a little pamphlet that he had put together, 58 biblical reasons why there is no investigative judgment. 58 reasons. I still have it. I keep that. There are others in our midst who don't believe the investigative judgment is in the Bible. In 1980, the scholars were still trying to figure out a way around this problem of Ellen White saying this and the Bible saying this. And Raymond Cottrell, one of the most respected men in our history, stood up and he said Ellen White has the right to reinterpret the Bible. That was his answer. That's pure pagan thought form. He died believing that. He wanted to defend the spirit of prophecy, and he defended it with a pagan thought. I'm sure he died never knowing what he'd done. But we can't afford to not know what's going on. This church has got to wake up. One way or another, God is going to do it. She has the right to reinterpret the Bible. All right, let's go into a background. let's see where this comes from, because there is a history. I'm going to give you some names. Don't worry about all the ins and outs. I'm not going to give you complete things. I just want you to get a boiled down version so you know some of the background. Each one of these men are a course by themselves in college or universities. So we're not going to cover it in 5 minutes, okay? But I'm going to give you the bottom line. The first name is Hegel. This is a world-class philosopher who has changed the world with his thinking. Okay? Hegel. The bottom line of what he teaches, it boils down to what he calls necessity. In human life, there is a necessity, and that necessity is that opposites have to be there. You cannot live your life without opposites. If you think white, you have to think black. Okay? Opposites. If you think existence, you have to think non-existence. Okay? And so he built his entire framework on this one concept, and it takes a lot of reading to figure out what he's talking about to get there. But this is what he's doing. He says this is a necessity. And the reason he does this is he's going to twist your brain around now. He says that when you have existence here and you have non-existence here, those opposites have to come together and you have a unity. And if this doesn't make any sense to you, that's good. Because it doesn't make any sense. Only to philosophers, and I don't know how they get a hold of this. Opposites. The necessity of opposites. Because they're necessary, you have to have them together. That's what he's saying. And when you get opposites together, then you have a unity. And of course, anybody with common sense knows that you can't get opposites together. I mean, where do you see that happening? Common sense will not allow this. If you could make extreme opposites actually come together and be unified, you have no more form of reference for anything. There's no such thing as logic anymore. In the real world, you have to have opposites that stay opposite. Okay. And so Hegel tricked the whole world into thinking that harmony and unity and wholeness is based on getting opposites together. That's just the beginning. So a negative and a positive somehow come together and make one thing here. Well, we've heard this someplace else. Let's see, where did we hear that? Spiritualism and materialism. Those are opposites. According to Hegel, you bring them together, and what do you get? Well, there's only one thing you get when you do that. That's pantheism. Now, if the supreme idea is a zero, and supreme materialism is a zero, and you bring both zeros together, what do you get? A zero. You end up with nothing. That's what these philosophers are playing with. Nothing. You get nothing out of this. And so, we had a name for that when you end up with pantheism. Remember, Ellen White was told by God to call it something. When you get supreme spirit and supreme material together and you get pantheism, That means God is in everything. That's pantheism. Well, Ellen White was given a name for it. She says, I saw this thing, this weird child of spiritualism and materialism, and I didn't know what to call it. But God told her what to call it. Do you remember? Free loveism. Do you remember now? Free loveism. Eros. That's what we've got here. So, Hegel didn't invent anything new. He's just given us his version of Eros. Okay, but hold on to it. Opposites come together and make a unity. That's the first philosophical idea we're working with here. In reality, you have a thing called antithesis. Antithesis. A thesis is one idea, and the antithesis is the opposite. Okay? That's the real world. Thesis, antithesis. And that's what they say. If you can ever change them or get them to merge, they will no longer be thesis and antithesis. Okay? So logically, it can't happen. You cannot make an antithesis a thesis. Satan, however, invented something. It says if you have a thesis and you have an opposite, an antithesis, you can clear up the whole problem by having a synthesis. Now you remember that word, synthesis, because that's the devil's word. It has nothing to do with reality. You cannot make opposites come together and call them a synthesis. But that's what Hegel's philosophy does. That's his contribution to thinking in terms of vocabulary. Thesis, antithesis, or thesis, antithesis, synthesis. It's like logic. Okay. So that's what he has put in front of us. Now let's do this the way the scholars are doing it to make it work for Adventism. The thesis is the Bible. The opposite is Ellen White, Spirit Prophecy. And the only way you're going to make it all work is to put them together in a synthesis. They're both right. That's an interesting thing, that modern scholarship in Adventism got that from Hegel. We didn't make it up. The devil invented it through Hegel. And of course, it's beyond Hegel, too. We don't have time to show where it came from to him. But the world gives him credit, so we'll leave it there. Let me just throw something at you that common sense will clear this up. If something here is true, then the opposite of that is what? It's false. Okay? Simple. You can never say they are both true if they're opposite. So keep common sense working for you. You can forget about Hegel except if you hear it in church. Then you have to reject it. Okay? If Hegel is right, and you have something, a thesis here, an antithesis here, and they're both right when you get them together, then when you tell somebody about right and wrong, you are making a nonsense statement. There is no right and wrong if everything is right. And that's another thing that Des Ford played in front of me that didn't go down that day. He said the apostolic principle, that every church, what they teach is right. And I looked at him and I said, yeah, except the Adventist church, right? And he had to swallow his own words because he was fighting the Adventist interpretation. Now, these philosophical ideas don't hold with a little common sense, just a little. Let's go after another name, Paul Tillich. Tremendous mind. He also has changed the world. By the way, these are Germans. It's amazing what the German mind has done to this planet. And it's not because of a race or a nation. It's the devil has used that locality for a particular reason. Paul Tillich, theologian. We could spend 3 or 4 months just discussing his background and why he became a theologian. He had to become a theologian. But the upshot of it was he didn't believe in God. Isn't that interesting? The theologian that has changed the world's view of God didn't even believe in him. Paul Tillich, he came up with a word that you talk to any theologian about, they recognize it instantly. Man's ultimate concern. That's Paul Tillich. You say those 3 words, nobody else. Paul Tillich. Man's ultimate concern. And of course, man's ultimate concern in Paul Tillich's writings is God. Man's ultimate concern is God. But what you don't pick up, and what most theologians don't even understand, is that when you're reading Paul Tillich, what does he mean by God? Man. And you're right, the man he was thinking about was himself. The way he looks at things. So, man's ultimate concern is himself. Man is his own God. That's very difficult to pick up in his writings, because if you are predisposed to think about God in a biblical sense, you think that's what he's saying. But that's not what he's saying at all. And once you get that key, his writings just jump out at you. What he's really saying. He's saying man is self-existent. There's no reason for anything supernatural. Nothing. And of course, when you talk like that, you've gotten rid of the virgin birth. You've gotten rid of a whole bunch of things. As a matter of fact, you've moved over into symbology and myths, and we don't have time to get into all of this. But one thing that really grabbed him, he was alive during the time when the teachings of natural science were coming up. And that's where he was. Forget the supernatural. Science. Science. And of course the science he knew about was called evolution. And so he had a thing to deal with that he got from Hegel. You've got 2 opposites now. You've got science and you've got the Bible. Natural science, Holy Writ. You have to reconcile these somehow, so I'll be a theologian. And he didn't believe in God. I mean, this is weird when you get into history and pick these things out. And so, he says that we've got to escape this problem of science and the Bible. And here comes his answer. It's very difficult to pick out in his writings, but once you see it, it's clear. There's an answer to this. doubt. Just doubt everything. And you have no more problems. And I guess if you want to escape, that might work. Doubt. How can man know anything, he says? It's impossible. And so he, like Hegel, says, you can believe both and. There's no such thing as either or. That's no good. You believe them both. You include everything. And so a person who's got their correct mind listens to all of this. I say, what are you saying? What are you talking about? And the scholars look at him and say, oh, poor foolish little child. I'll have to give a name for you. Paradox. It's self-contradictory, yes. It's impossible, yes. It's a paradox. And the poor simple child goes away home saying, it's a paradox. These words were spoken at the seminary when the scientists sat together with the theologians and tried to work out the problem of the creation of the earth and how old it is. Our men. And they couldn't work it out. And so one of the big men was asked, how do we solve this? He stood up, he said, paradox. And all the rest of them smiled and said, right, paradox. Oh, it's almost unbelievable that God's people could swallow what the devil is doing with these pagan philosophers and theologians. You know, I could get shot for talking like this. Paradox. And so Tillich says, you know, the problem with the Bible and the way it deals is it's giving you all of this guilt to deal with. And I want you to know that it's a false guilt. You don't need to have it. And you can get rid of all this guilt with a simple thing. Just doubt. And I don't have time to carry you through all of his thinking and all of his writing and all of his... He says at the end of it that Paul was right. We are justified by faith alone. And then he says, but he could have said the same thing about doubt. Doubt and faith are the same in salvation. And you know, when I break it down for you like this, you have to wonder, how did theologians ever believe this garbage? But they do. They teach this in seminaries. He says a man's radical doubt is a profound religious experience. And so all we're seeing again is extremism, it's humanistic rationalism, it's pagan thought forms. Let's go to the next one, Kierkegaard. You see, I'm trying to build up where our men came from in their studies in these other universities. They studied all these men. Kierkegaard. I know, because I had to get my dose too. The only difference is that every second I was in there, I was saying, this is not true, this is not true, this is not true, this is not true. I had just come from months of studying the Spirit of Prophecy because I didn't believe that either until I read it. But it was in there. And when this stuff came in front of me, That's what I'd say. It's not true. I'll put it on paper for you, but it's not true. It's not true. Kierkegaard. The reason I bring up Kierkegaard is because he brought paradox to a fine point. He's the master of paradox. Matthew 16:25. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it. And whosoever will lose his life for my sake shall find it. See? Now that doesn't make sense. It's not reasonable. That's a paradox. According to Kierkegaard and according to theologians. Well, again, if we're trying to use pagan thought forms to understand the Bible, it's not going to make any sense at all. How can you lose your life and save it at the same time? Well, you can't. It's impossible. So obviously, Jesus was not saying about the same life. He was talking about two different kinds of life. One that's lost and one that's saved. Okay? The solutions to all of these are so simple. But theologians fill books telling you how dumb and unreasonable all of this is. Well, they're forgetting that's Jesus talking. Well, they have an answer for that too. Jesus is just a symbol. He's a symbol of the Father's love, a symbol of the plan of salvation. But the historical Jesus, that doesn't matter very much. I'm not taking you to all the places this goes. I'm just trying to give you the background for some of the reasons where some of our own scholars are moving in that direction to help us get along with evangelicals. Well, it's obvious that if once you look at this, Jesus could not have been talking about the same life at the same time. That's an absolutely absurd idea. He was talking about opposite conceptions. Life under this circumstance, life under that circumstance. You try to save this life, the one is lost, you can never get the other one. Okay. So the question we need to ask right now, as we mentioned about Genesis, this is Jesus talking as God. Does God's reason and the way he uses reason contradict man's reason? I don't think so. Any man, I don't care who he is, if he's got any brains at all, knows there's something wrong with saying save your life and lose it at exactly the same time is a reality. God uses the same thought forms that he has put into human beings. So when he says, come, let us reason together, what he's saying is, let's use the same forms so we can understand each other. I have created you with the ability to do that. I have made you as a man to understand me when I talk to you if you want to hear. I mean, does it make any sense that God created a universe to fight in because they don't know what he's saying? Why would he do that? Even a child would ask the question, what for? No, God created a universe to be in harmony with him, to think like he thinks. Let me ask you another just out of nowhere question. Is good sense nonsense? I mean, we don't have to go far to really understand these things? Good sense is good sense. Period. So in Isaiah 55, when God says, my thoughts are not your thoughts, he's saying, because they're so high and lofty, you can't go there. But you can certainly understand when I tell you something. And we use the same way of thinking about it and same reasoning modes. Obviously, if we're going to live with God forever and be disciples of his forever, he's going to always be superior. Always. That's never going to change. And so maybe there's nothing bad about being inferior to God. It seems to me we ought to get used to our being a creature sometimes. Yeah, God is superior. But there are not two different truth systems, one for God and one for man. There is only one system of truth, and both participate in that one system. Okay? God is not two-faced. He has equipped us for an intelligent dialogue with him. And when I say that he has equipped us for an intelligent dialogue, I'm talking about before we have salvation. Otherwise, we could never make a decision to get over there. We are to understand who God is and what he's telling us before we say, okay. No, it's obvious that a person who isn't born again cannot do spiritual things within the plan of salvation. It's not possible. You have to have the Spirit to do that. But you can understand before you get the Spirit. And you can make positive choices. I have often wondered at the theologians that talk about total depravity and misuse Martin Luther, saying that we can do absolutely nothing. We can do nothing. We can't think. We can't have any kind of a faith response. Nothing. Well, my Bible says that God has put faith into every human being. Every human being. That he's put his law in every reasonable human being. That humans know the difference between right and wrong. Cultural things, okay, that's different. But I'm talking about the difference between right and wrong. It's done that. And while no person is saved outside of Jesus Christ, humans can understand about Jesus before they're saved. John 12:24. The people of Jesus' time lived a lot closer to the ground than we do. So he could talk to them and say simple things, and they would understand spiritual truths we just have a hard time with. I mean, today, for example, if you were to ask a child, where does water come from? Say, the faucet. That's water comes from the faucet. Well, I guess it does, doesn't it? But where does it come from? The faucet? No. Where does it really come from? Unless somebody has taken the time to show them about rivers and condensation and clouds and oceans and all that stuff, they're not going to know what you're asking them. What's it say over there in John 12? Verily, verily, I say unto you, except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abides alone. It's no good for anything except maybe to get chewed up. But if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit. Well, everybody he said that to knew what he was saying. Everybody. No big mystery, but a theologian gets a hold of this and says, oh, you have to die to live? Like some mystery has been said. Any farmer tells you, you put the corn in there, it dies, and then it grows. Big deal. There is no paradox here. I don't care what theologians say. There is no paradox. This is a fundamental reality. It is a principle of God's universe. It's called self-sacrifice. Okay? It's against the devil's pagan thought form. Immanuel Kant. We're running out of time here. Immanuel Kant. This is the last one we'll talk about for today. Well, maybe we should mention Descartes. We have to mention him. He's the only non-German in this whole bunch. Descartes French. The French got in a few licks too. But Descartes said, we should doubt everything. There it is, the cult of doubt coming up. That's one of the philosophers' answers to things. Doubt. You have to doubt everything. And so, I'm reminded of a paper I wrote in one philosophy class. I titled it, Cognito Ergo Sum. Cognito, question mark. Which translated into English means, I think, therefore I am. That's what Descartes said. I think, therefore I am. But he wasn't sure about that either. But I think, therefore I am. And in Latin I said, I think. The professor gave me an A on that. He thought that was kind of clever. Just my title, I think. But this is a philosophy. You are to doubt everything, even the fact that you exist. You should doubt. Do you ever wake up in the morning wondering, am I really here? Am I really me? That's what they teach. You're to doubt even that because you can't be sure. Well, let's talk about Kant now, because he's the one that really put this together. Kant was looking for a thing he called universalizability. He was trying to find something that absolutely works every place all the time as an ethic. He never did. He says all humans are born with a permanent bias. And by that he meant the way you look at the world is built into you as an individual, and you can never get rid of it. Your perception is unique to you. Well, so far we don't have a problem with that. Okay, so my perception. But here's where he goes with that. He says your perception is like this. There's a white house, and you have green glasses on. So when somebody asks you, what color is the house? Okay? But it isn't. It's white. You just think it's green because you have green glasses on. That's the problem he's bringing up here. See? Somebody else wears their little orange glasses, and that's an orange house. And so forth. So he says, here's the basic problem, that human beings think there's something out there. But it's just their perceptions. And of course you can go to a lot of the sci-fi stuff. What's his name? The first one, I can't think of his name right now. Isaac Asimov. This is the kind of stuff he used to write, you know. You think you see stuff out there, but it's not really there. You're being tested by the aliens and so forth. But this is what Kant was saying. It's not really out there. It's your perception. That's what it is. And he says, and because of this bias that you have built into your life a thing that you think is cause and effect. There is no cause and effect. It's only in your head. And of course, it's kind of hard for real people to get a hold of because it's not true. But this is where the philosophers are going. Cause and effect. And so he says, let me formalize this thing for you. It comes out in two ways here about things. Number one, things that you perceive are as they look to you. So there are only things as you see them. That's all. And number two, if there are real things in themselves, then that's the only real reality. But you never see them. You only see your perception. So if you want to know about life, there are things that you perceive, and if there's a reality, you don't look at that. Now, I'm going through all these pains to try to explain some of this to you because this is what's coming into Adventism. Now, it seems to me I've heard that somewhere else before. Kant, where did you get that? What's in front of you here is only what you see. That's the material. But the real thing is the pure idea. We're back to Plato. He isn't telling us any more than Plato told us. But Kant will introduce a few more sophisticated things along the way, but that's all we need to know. He's back to the material and the pure spirit. We're back to the physical senses. We're back to the spirit. This is what the Sunday-keeping churches are teaching every week. They're teaching all this paganism. And I don't know how many Adventists, I even had an Adventist minister ask me, what's the big deal with the state of the dead? Why do we have to teach that? If you don't teach what the Bible says about that, you're a pagan. And so Kant, getting down to it here, he says this self-deception, man's self-deception through his perception. Man's self-deception is his uniqueness, and you ought to be glad you have it. He said, enjoy it, live in it, know you're deceiving yourself, and just live your life. Now, I have to tell you that if you are a philosopher and you're reading these books, pages and pages of all this wonderful writing, you don't see this stuff right away. You may not see it at all. I mean, when you write a book and you measure by the pound, watch out what you're reading. These people have fooled a lot of people because people don't know what they're wading through. But when you have understood the Bible and you see Jesus Christ, all of a sudden these pagan ideas just look like what they look like. All right, we're running out of time here, so I didn't get through half of what I want to do today, but we can't come back to this. I don't want to saturate you with these weird ideas. I just want you to know this world is full of weird things that we don't need to be messing with as a church. But our scholars are not only reading them, they don't know their way through them. They have not been geared to understand philosophical argument. I will now read to you literally what Raymond Cottrell has written. The man who, while he was alive, taught our scholars. Now, with this background, I will read you the statement. Quote, with the traditional Adventist interpretation of Daniel 8:14 as thesis, the historic, linguistic, contextual method of exegesis, which stands in opposition to it at practically every point as its antithesis. Now, did you get that? That's an Adventist talking. One of the highest Adventist scholars we've had in this church. He says Daniel 8:14, the way Adventists teach it, is in opposition to the way the scholars learn it. That's a point-blank statement. Now I'm going to read you another paragraph on that page to see what he does with that. Those two. Now here's the quote. Are as impossible and mutually exclusive as matter and antimatter, and have the potential of mutually destroying each other and the church as well. While Adventist Bible scholars have adopted the historical method, the church as a whole still basically practices the proof text method. Unresolved, this dichotomy could have unfortunate consequences. End of quote. So what did he say? He said the scholars of Adventism have accepted the scholarship method of interpreting the Bible. But the church, that's everybody else, but the church still does proof text. They just take the Bible the way it reads. That was in 1980. The church has come a long way since then. Pagan thought forms are not a game. The devil knows what he's doing. He is trying to destroy God's people. He has done it every other place by getting them to use the wrong way of thinking. And so what we're trying to get to here is God has given you a mind. He's given you that mind to use. Not just to sit around listening to people, not to collect tapes and videos. He's given you a mind to study, to hear His voice speaking to you, to get into the Bible, to know what the Spirit of prophecy says, and then to weigh everything that comes at you based on what God is revealing to you as a person. It's a person-to-person thing. There's nothing automatic. The devil uses automatic principles. God does it person to person. And so each one of us, as we go through these kinds of studies, we need to decide, is the Bible true? Are the writings of Ellen White true? Well, if they are, when somebody says something different, we need to be able to very quickly decide what we're going to do with that. Okay? All right, as we close this meeting, now what did I do with it? This is the Review and Herald, what's in your mailbox, so you have it already. There's nothing wrong here. I just want to read you something to try to focus in here. One high-level official of the United States State Department told me privately, and this is to a Seventh-day Adventist, here's the quote, "Religious freedom is a luxury we can no longer afford." That's the State Department. That's the highest level of government in this country. The State Department. And they don't think religious freedom is something America can afford anymore. Is the great controversy happening or isn't it? I don't know about you, but a sentence like that tells me, I don't care what any scholar says from whatever school he came to, when he tells me Ellen White is wrong, guess who I'm going to go out with? It's right there in history. Who would have thought the United States government people would be talking like that? At the United Nations, this statement, the worldwide trend as regards religion and belief is towards increased intolerance and discrimination against minorities. And we are one of those. That's what their Religious Liberty Department says at the United Nations. The United States is saying it's necessary. They're saying it's a fact. Here's another statement. The world situation shows an overall rise in intolerance and discrimination against religious minorities and women in situations of extreme risk, and an increase in religious extremism affecting all religions. Guess who we're going to be? She says so. Great Controversy, page 590. They're going to say, we are causing the problems in this world. We used to read those and say, well, someday, hey, it's today. They just haven't put our name on the list yet. And if you want, pick it up from the newspapers. Here it is in the Review and Herald. Okay? God is building a people on this planet. You can't see them yet. But I really believe He has some here. He's building some right here. He's not allowing us to be together like this just to be, blowing air. We're supposed to be catching this and deciding, I'm going to be one of those, whatever it costs. Okay, I don't want to go into more areas right now. We will just spend until the first talking about this way of looking at things, and we'll start a different thing. I want to get back to some devotional things to show how Ellen White has told us how to measure ourselves as Christians. It's one thing to know you're a Christian, but then there's something we need to be doing, and we sometimes don't get the idea of it until we see it in print. God has to tell us. And I know that because in volume 9, for example, she says it's the job of the pastor to teach the people how to work, what to do, to give them opportunities and all kinds of different things. In other words, we don't just all of a sudden think about this and do it. We have to have some instruction. And I think the Lord wants us to somehow get motivated here and get some ideas across. Maybe we can do some writing and share some ideas with each other, things we think we can do. You might be thinking about that. Not all of us can go put up a tent and start talking. But we all can do something. We ought to be thinking, what is it I could do? Well, I could write a letter to so-and-so. Yeah, I could give a booklet to so-and-so. Things like that. So be thinking about it, and we'll talk about it as we go along here. All right, let's have prayer. Father, we thank you. You never blame us for anything. You love us. And it's the real love, the selfless agape love that wants to serve us. Help us to understand that you really are our Father. You're our Creator. That you made us for a purpose, and you mean to see that purpose fulfilled. Help us to sense that we all have been trained to focus on things in this world, and we need to get past that. We need to hear your voice. We need to read the words you have written for us. We need to spend the time. We need to meditate. We need to be available. We need to be merciful and compassionate with people. We need to really want to serve. Help us, Lord, to sense during this time when people's attention is about Jesus coming, that he wants to come again. He's yearning to have himself revealed again on this planet through his people. Help us to know that we really are those people. It's not somebody else. And help us to know that whatever it takes, you're going to see it through. May we be willing. And if we're not completely willing, let us be willing to be made willing. We thank you in Jesus' precious name. Amen.